Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be bringing a new lease of life to this old Dell PC. Okay then guys, so welcome back. In front of me here I have a Dell Inspiron 546. It's a 2009 PC, I believe, about 15 years old at this point, but the customer's given it to me to wipe the drives, which I've already done, and to dispose of it. But I was recently very lucky with a deal online and I got a motherboard for very cheap. So I've decided, instead of throwing this PC case away, I'm going to make use of it and I'm going to turn it into a very functional PC. I'll take the side panel off and we can have a look at what's inside. Okay then guys, so I've got the side panel off and just taking a quick look in here. So full disclosure, I have blown this out with the air duster because when I went in there originally to take the drives out to wipe them, it was extremely dusty. Obviously it is a 15-year-old computer. I did expect quite a bit of dust, so it does look a lot cleaner than it did when I first opened it up. So it looks like it's got 4 DIMM slots for RAM. So we've got a PCIe x16 there, and we've got a PCIe x1 above it, and 2 regular PCI slots. I've just noticed we are missing the top back plate there, so I'm assuming at some point in time there was a graphics card in this, a 300 watt power supply, so that's good. So we'll power it on in a second and we'll find out what processor and RAM it's running. Just taking a look at the front panel here, and interestingly we are missing the floppy disk panel. Pretty sure I can see the power cable for it there, but the actual panel itself is missing, or should I say the floppy disk drive itself is missing. But as you can see there, we have got 2 USBs, look a little bit grimy, as well as a microphone and headphone jack. On the top CD drive there, we've got the actual CD drive. That's interesting. Let's just double check. Oh, okay, that's very interesting. So that looks like it is the floppy disk drive, but it's in the second CD drive slot, which is interesting. That might actually bode well for one of the upgrades that I've got planned for this, but we'll get back to that in a minute. So just looking at the connectivity that we've got at the back here, we've got a HDMI, we've also got a VGA, we've got 4 USBs, no USB 3s, they just look like normal regular USB 2s, Ethernet port, which will be a 10100B port, and mic jacks, etc. at the bottom there. Okay, so I've got a keyboard and mouse hooked up. I've also connected the power and the HDMI. We've got a motherboard light there, which is always good news. So I'm just going to power it on, and with it being a Dell, my assumption is that the F2 button is for the BIOS. So I'm going to try spamming that when I turn it on, and we'll see if that takes us to the BIOS. So we'll just go over here and press the power button. So we've got some power. If we get anything, oh, I did see something there, and there we go. So we're into the BIOS. Let's go into the system info there, see what it says. An Inspiron 546, which we knew, and as you can see there, the processor type is an AMD Athlon 7550 dual core. Obviously not the most powerful machine in the history of mankind, but what I'm more worried about there, guys, is the memory that's installed. 1024 megabytes, aka 1 gigabyte of RAM, and looking at that speed there, 667 megahertz. Yeah, I mean, it's DDR2. I don't know what we were expecting there. I mean, the BIOS, as it says there, was updated last in 2010. Not a very good baseline, to be honest. So ultimately, guys, this just would not be worth spending any money on if we were just going to continue to use this particular board. I did have a look as well, and apparently the maximum supported memory on this particular motherboard is 8 gigabytes, so that would mean 2 gig in each one of those. Really not very good. So I think we've looked at this old board enough. It's now time for me to show you what I managed to grab for a good deal and what I'll be replacing this board with and upgrading this computer to. Okay then guys, so here is the motherboard that I managed to acquire for an insanely good price. This is the Asus A88XME. So this is a 2014 motherboard, around 5 years newer than the Dell motherboard that we're going to be replacing. And in those 5 years, a lot has changed. One of the reasons it was probably so cheap is the fact that the PCIe retention clip here has obviously broken off at some point. But any of you that knows anything about PC building knows that, to be quite honest, it's not really needed. In fact, quite a few boards don't even have them at all. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to try and put it next to the other one, and we're going to go through the differences, and ultimately we're going to go through all of the upgraded elements of this board compared to the other board. Okay guys, so here we've got both boards side by side. Obviously we've got the old Dell Inspiron 546 on the left and the new Asus on the right. Immediately what we can say with certainty is that the Dell 546 board is physically bigger. The CPU fan as well as the cooler are a lot bigger than the fan and cooler on the other one, as well as the fact is that we get 4 RAM slots as opposed to 2 on the other one. But what I want to do is I want to demonstrate to you how much technology actually came on in those 5 years. First of all, this board has 4 SATA ports, okay, whereas this one has 6. However, better than that, because these ports will be SATA 2, whereas these are SATA 3. So these are 6 gigabytes a second ports, and there's 6 of them as opposed to 4. So that's the first example of how technology's moved on. Second, obviously we've got 4 RAM slots here. However, this board maxes out at 8 gigabytes of RAM. So that means you can only put 2 gig in each slot. Yes, it supports dual channel, but we only get up to 8 gigabytes. I believe the maximum speed that this board will run at RAM-wise is 667 megahertz. So yeah, not the fastest RAM going. Now on this side, you could say, well, immediately it looks worse because we've only got 2 RAM slots. However, this board supports up to 32 gigabytes, which means you can put 16 gig in each slot to make 32 gigabytes. And it's DDR3, so it's a newer style of RAM, and this board supports RAM speeds of up to 2133 megahertz, a massive RAM upgrade over the other board. The other things are slightly harder to see, but I'll run through them with you anyway. So on this board at the back here, we have 4 USBs. The 4 USBs on here are all USB 2. However, on this board we have 2 USB 2s, but also 2 USB 3s. I believe they're 5 gigabyte a second ports, so they're like generation, guessing it's 3.1. Far faster than USB 2. Also in this area we have a 10100 Ethernet port, maximum download speed of about 100 megabytes a second, whereas on this side we have a gigabit Ethernet port, which means in theory you should be able to get speeds up to 1000 megabytes a second. We also have PS2 mouse and keyboard connections here. Obviously they're not really used much in this day and age, but still nice to have. Both boards have HDMI and VGA just here, but this board also underneath has a DVI connection as well. Moving over to the bottom here, we have quite a few USB 2.0 connections here. We have a specific audio connection port there as well, front panel power connector there. However, on this one we have something that the other one doesn't have, and that's this 19-pin USB 3 connection here, which allows you to connect a USB 3 front panel to the board. We also have a socket here for a TPM chip, something that this one doesn't have, and the PCI generation on this one is PCI 3.0, whereas I believe the PCIe generation on this one is only 2.0. It may even be 1.0, I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, just on the get-go, you can see guys, it's a massive upgrade, and it's actually a smaller footprint as well, which is always good. So what I'm going to do is we're going to put this board in the 546 Inspiron case, but before we do that, I want to run through the additional upgrades that I'm going to perform on this. Okay guys, so these are the 3 upgrades that I'm going to be performing. Some would argue they're just expansions. So starting off at the bottom here, we have the USB 3 floppy disk adapter. So ultimately, I showed you earlier in the video, there was actually a free slot where the floppy disk was, or should I say someone's actually moved what should have been in there to a slot above, and that leaves us perfect room for this bad boy. And what this is it ultimately allows you to have USB 3 connectivity at the front of your computer. And not only that, it also allows you to have direct Type-C connectivity, which with the new iPhones and things, it's quite useful. If we look at the back here, you have a USB 3 female socket there, and how that works is they give you a cable here with a USB 3 socket on one end and a 19-pin connector on the other end. And as you saw earlier in the video, the new board has a 19-pin connector on it there. And we also have a strange looking 4-pin connector there, and for those of you that don't know what that is actually the old floppy disk connector. I can only assume that is to allow you to charge devices faster. I don't think it's required in order to power the USBs normally. I think all it will do is allow anything that you connect via these USBs to have a bit more power and charge a bit quicker. But me personally, I don't need that connectivity. I have a dedicated charger just above it on the desk, so I don't actually need that. But it is nice to know that you can hook it up to the PC power supply and get a little bit more charging from it. So that's that one. Moving on to the next one. This is a really neat unit. So this is an NVMe, NGFF and mSATA expansion card. So it allows you to connect those 3 drives via the 16 times PCIe connector, and it allows you to ultimately use these drives with your PC. Now, it isn't as perfect as it sounds. So the NVMe one, which I believe is this one here, this one is powered and transfers data via the PCIe port. However, the other two, so the NGFF and the mSATA, they transfer data via the SATA ports here. So they are still powered via this, but they require data transfer to go via the SATA ports, which, as we've seen earlier, is no problem for this particular setup because we have 6 SATA ports and they're all SATA 3 as well. So that's that one. And then the final expansion card here, as we've got, some of you might notice what that is. That is a Mac SSD slot there. So what this means is that although I'm running a Windows PC, I will be able, using a VM, to access Mac drives and recover data from them, etc. Super cheap, but really useful. And as you can see here, it's a 1X slot, so I will be able to connect both of these expansion cards simultaneously to the board without having to take one out. So yeah, those are the 3 main upgrades, guys. So what we'll do now, we'll put the new board into the Dell 546 case, and we'll have a look at how it fits in there. I believe it's going to have much more room than the original board did. It'll be interesting to see if all of the cables reach the various ports, because they are slightly different, etc. But what we'll do, I'll bring over the computer case and I'll mount the camera up and we'll get the board in. Okay guys, so we're just looking down into the computer case here. I've just moved all the cables out of the way. And the other thing I did forget to mention is that I did also get the IO shield with the motherboard. So we're just going to go ahead and chuck that in before we actually put the board in. So make sure it's the right way up. Okay, so now that's in, we should be good to put the board in, and I can already tell just by the size of it that it's going to go in a lot easier than the original did. So we'll just go in now, put it underneath, nice and slowly. Yeah, wow. I can already tell there's so much more room here. Let's get under the shields there. Okay, so as you can see, it looks absolutely tiny in there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a few screws in and we can start connecting everything up. Okay, so I've put all the screws in, so it's time to start connecting everything up now. Start there with the CPU power connector. That's that one. The CPU fan is already connected. We'll go with the main motherboard power supply there. So we've got the USB audio port just there, quite a tight lead actually, that one, just about got enough. So we've got the power socket connector just there. Hopefully the LEDs are wired the correct way, but we'll find out when we turn it on. So that is for the floppy disk SD adapter. So that one we can just plug in the far USB socket just there. And then just hiding there at the bottom is a green connector. which is for the front USB 2s. That'll have to be turned upside down and go just here. Okay, and so we've obviously got the SATA power connectors here, but we haven't got a drive to put in this yet, so we're just going to leave that for now. We've also got the case fan connector. Now, I have just noticed that on board is a 4-pin PWM connector, and this fan is a regular 3-pin fan. Now, it doesn't mean it won't work. If I do connect it, it will spin and it will work fine. However, the speed controlling element of it will be dead, so ultimately it'll be running at full speed all the time, and I imagine it'll be quite loud. So just for now, I'm going to leave it disconnected. What we're going to do is we're going to stand it back up and we're going to connect it all up, and we're going to see if we get a display. Okay guys, so there it is, the new board in all of its glory. Looking good. Did also forget to mention, I did do a mod previously to this just before I swapped the board, just because I wanted to add extra element of cooling to this. Obviously there isn't any way of fastening a fan to the front case, so I made my own makeshift anchor there for the fan. In order to power it, I spliced into the back of the original floppy disk connector so it can still be used. I've patched into the 12 volt and the ground so it will run at full speed all the time. If this was a regular fan, it will be terribly noisy. However, this is an Arctic silent fan. I believe it's the F12, so yeah, you shouldn't really hear it at all, even at full speed. So I figured what it would do is it would allow extra cooling in this direction, and obviously we've got the exhaust fan here, and the CPU fan is blowing towards the CPU, so you want cool air coming this way. So I figured that was kind of a neat little addition since I had the spare fan. The other thing I wanted to say just before I turn it on is I wanted to mention the spec of the components that came with the board, because I didn't mention that yet. So the processor is an Athlon 2 X4 750K. I believe it's a quad core 3.4 GHz, and the RAM is 8 GB in the form of two 4 GB sticks of DDR3. Not sure what the speed is, but I'm sure we'll find out when we turn the computer on. And so without further ado, let's power it up. So we're getting a light and we're getting some fans spinning. Obviously that one's disconnected for now, but as you can see, my fan there is spinning, my custom fan, so that's good. So let's see what we get on the screen. Oh, so we're not getting anything on the screen. Definitely connected. Okay guys, so just realized what's happening here. So for those of you that went to go ahead and search that CPU that I've just mentioned was in here, you would realize that it hasn't got any integrated graphics. So in order to use this particular CPU on board, you would need to put a graphics card in the PCIe slot, which obviously, due to the expansion that we're going to add to this, would not be suitable. So yeah, I'm going to have to go and find a CPU that I can swap for this with integrated graphics. So just checking the graphics section of the manual here, and it says integrated AMD Radeon series graphics in A series APUs. So that means in order for us to be able to use the integrated graphics feature, we need an APU, an A series processor. I'm just looking here on CPU upgrade. Asus do have their own list of supported processors for their own board, of course, but I find that the processors are organized better on here, so I use this instead normally. So we're looking at the Asus A88XME processor support, and as it says there, it's socket FM2 Plus. So if we just scroll down here, as you can see, first of all there, the AMD A4 series, so looking in the right place, but they're only dual cores, so we ideally want a quad core. So if we just scroll down a bit further, A6s, we've also got A8s, and we've got A10s, and then underneath the A10s, as you can see there, we've got the Athlon X2, which means this is the end of the list for the A series APUs. So this one here at the bottom is the best one, the A10 7890K, and it's 4.1 gigahertz and 95 watts quad core. So what I'll do, I'll just give you an example of the price for this processor. So we're on AliExpress, and there it is, the A10 7890K, and the price there is $88.88, and that price is actually before tax. So you're looking at about £100 minimum for that processor, which, to be honest guys, for this build that we're doing here, it's a bit much. So what we'll do, we'll go back to the list of processors and we'll check the one underneath it. So the one underneath it is the A10 7870K, and it doesn't seem to be that much difference in the performance, 3.9 gigahertz as opposed to 4.1. But if we go back to AliExpress over here and click on it, as you can see there, 37.33, which I imagine with tax will probably take you up to just under £50. So that's literally half the price. So just to double check that I'm not missing anything here, I've come to User Benchmark, which I use quite a lot, to see what the real world performance differences are between the two. So as you can see here on the left, we've got the A10 7890K APU, and on the right we've got the 7870K APU. Now interestingly, it does say 2 cores and 4 threads, and that's because Windows actually sees those 2-core processors even though they've got 4 cores. But if we scroll down here and have a look at the actual effective speed difference between the two, then you can see that literally it is 2% different, twice the price for an extra 2% effective speed in real world terms. So yeah, I'm not too bothered about spending the extra money guys. I think we'll be going for the 7870K. Okay then guys, so here we are about a week later, and I was able to locate a 7870K, and I actually only paid £30 all in for this, so pretty happy with that price. As we've just seen, the 7890K is just ridiculously overpriced for a 10-year-old processor. Only being 2% better, it just wasn't worth it. But, as we can see here guys, this is the one that I've got here, so it is used, but in terms of processors, as long as there's no visible damage and the pins look okay, which they do, you're safe to go with the used one. There's no real downside, to be honest. As you can see there, the correct code and everything for the 7870K. So I think what we'll do now is we'll get the processor swapped and we'll get this one installed. Okay then guys, so we've got the board here. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to unplug the fan there. There we are. So now that the fan's unplugged, we should just be able to flip back the retention clip here. There we go. And just unhook it from the top and unhook it from the bottom. Like that. And then we should just be able to lift the heatsink off of the processor. Let's just see. It's well stuck down, and there we go. It's coming straight off. So that's the old paste. It does look like it's been pasted recently, actually, quite sticky still. And there we have the processor itself. So I'll just pull back the arm here, which will allow it to, there we go back like so, and then it should just be able to lift the processor out just like that. Processor. So I'm just going to clean this off here. So there we are, the Athlete X4 750K. Quite a good processor, but fortunately we do need the integrated graphics, so in this scenario it's not going to be of any use to us. So here we have the A10. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do the normal. So we've got the arrow there in the top right corner. It's actually pretty hard to see. The arrow is actually there. For some reason that looked more like the arrow than that did, but nope, the arrow is that side. So again, we'll just try and drop it on, and there you are, drop straight in. Yeah, if you're ever replacing a CPU, you must never force it. If it doesn't want to go in, you must just recheck that you are putting it in the correct way and that the pins aren't bent or anything like that. So that's in, so we should just be able to push the arm across like so. That's firmly in now. So the next thing to do is to put some thermal paste on there. But what I'll do first is I'll clean off the heatsink. So I'll just clean this off. There is some paste stuck in the heatsink. I have to get some thin brushes just to get that out, and then we should be ready to put the paste on the processor. So I've also just cleaned around here because there was quite a bit of dust, but we're now ready to put some thermal paste on and go from there. So I'll just put that. So we're going to be using trusty Arctic Silver 5. So put some on somewhere nearby in the center of the chip. That should do just fine. And now the key is just to drop this on as straight as possible. Okay, so I'm just going to flip the retaining clip over. There we go. So I think I've got that pretty straight, guys. Not done too bad there. Plug the fan back in. And we just need to put this back in the computer case and fire it up and see if it works. Okay guys, so the board is back in. I've also added the upgrades / expansions that I showed you earlier. So as you can see there, we've got the NVMe M-SATA and NGFF SATA expansion card there, and then that's where you put them in on the underside. And then the one underneath, we've got the Mac SSD expansion. So the M-SATA and the NGFF SATA have to be connected via SATA leads, so that's where those red leads are going there. The two of the SATA ports on the system itself. The USBs that we added at the front connected there, going all the way up into the back there. And if we go around to the front, see that they're sat nicely in the floppy disk slot. So we've got 4 additional USBs, all USB 3 speed, which is awesome. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to hook it up to the power and we're going to boot it up and see what we can get. Okay, so I've hooked up the power, and obviously we're still in the integrated HDMI port there. So hopefully this time when I boot it up, we will get a display. Let's press the button and see what we get. Okay, so we get a blue light there. Fans are spinning and we're getting a green light from the expansion code. That's quite cool. Monitor's lit up blue. So that means we're going to get a display soon. Taking its time. Oh, and there we go. As you can see there, CPU information. We now have the AMD A10 7870K. Most importantly, we're now actually getting a display, and I've not had to put an external graphics card in this. So what we're going to do now, we're going to install Windows and we're going to explore it a bit further. So I've installed Windows and it's booted up okay, but I just wanted to show you this because this is quite interesting. So I did say originally that the motherboard came with 8GB of RAM, but as it's saying here, it's actually 12GB of RAM. So instead of there being two 4GB sticks, there's one 8GB stick and one 4GB stick. So that actually makes it an even better deal. But we'll just go ahead and test the expansions here. I've plugged in the front here a USB 3 stick, but I just wanted to do a speed test on it just to see what we've got. And we'll just do the first test there and let's see what it runs at. You can see it's flashing away there. It isn't a particularly expensive USB 3 drive, so I didn't expect the write to be that high, but that's what we're after there, those high read speeds, 100 megabytes plus. So that's good, so we know that's working. There is a 2230 NVMe SSD in our new expansion card there, and as you can see there is a blue LED which indicates that it's detected one. So if you look on here, as you can see, it's got a Windows installation on it actually. It's that one there, so it's 866 gigabytes. This is actually the SSD that I used in a previous video attempting to make my own Xbox expansion card. If you're interested in that one, then I definitely recommend going and watching that. As you can see, it's appeared in Windows. I can read from it. Now, I can't natively boot from that. This particular motherboard doesn't actually have the NVMe drivers on it. Now, if I really was bothered and I really wanted to do it, there are ways to get the NVMe drivers in the BIOS. Honestly guys, the SATA on this is 6GB a second. I've got a 500GB Crucial SSD as you can see here, so I'm really not bothered about actually booting from NVMe. I just like the idea of being able to access an NVMe disk should I need to. Now the final upgrade I can't actually try because I don't have a Mac SSD to hand. I will report back if it doesn't work, but I imagine it will and it will work similarly to the way that the NVMe card works. And the same goes for the NGFF and mSATA SSDs. To be honest, they're quite rare now. You either get normal SATA or NVMe drives. You rarely get mSATA or NGFF, but it's nice to know that I can actually connect those if I wish to. We'll just do a quick test of the NVMe read and write speed. Absolutely insane, guys. So there we have it. I've made use of the original case, the original power supply, as well as the original CD drive and SD reader. We've just replaced the board and added a few new things just to make it more modern, to make it a little bit more relevant in 2024. But now we've got a fully working Windows 11 computer. It's massively upgraded for very little cost. So I hope you've enjoyed the video, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.